The most dangerous kiss. She gave up everything for power, but he was the one who destroyed her. Elena Marchetti had never been a woman who needed permission. She came from the Marchetti family of Chicago, 3 generations of journalists, editors, and one grandfather who had covered the City Hall beat for the Tribune until his dying breath. The name carried weight in certain rooms, the kind of weight that opened doors and silenced doubt. Elena had grown up understanding that weight as both inheritance and obligation. She would carry the banner forward. She would be brilliant. She would be undeniable. And she was. At 26, she was the youngest staff writer ever hired by the Chicago Sentinel, the prestigious provincial publication that sat at the center of the city's intellectual life. Her bylines appeared on investigations that toppled aldermen, on profiles of cultural icons that made strangers weep at airport newsstands. She moved through the Sentinel's mahogany-paneled offices like a small, perfect storm, dark hair pinned in strict elegance, cheekbones that could cut glass, a mind that worked faster than most people's tongues. She was the center of attention in every room she entered, and she knew it, and she had learned to wear that knowledge like armor rather than vanity. Her parents, Franco and Elena Marchetti, immigrants from a small village outside Bologna who had built their American dream one newspaper route and one night class at a time, looked at their only daughter and saw triumphs. Franco would sometimes stand in the doorway of her childhood bedroom, now converted into a study, and watch her type, his espresso cooling in his hands, and feel something close to religious awe. "She is a lioness," he would say to Helena in Italian, meaning Elena. Or a lioness. Elena loved her parents. She loved them so much it sometimes felt like a physical weight in her chest, a stone she carried everywhere. And it was that love, that desperate, complicated, guilt-ridden love, that made her decision to quit the Sentinel feel like jumping off a cliff. It was March. The trees along Michigan Avenue were still bare, black fingers clawing at a gray sky. Elena sat at her desk in the third-floor newsroom, staring at the letter of resignation she had drafted for the 7th time. Her editor, Gerald Oates, a 62-year-old man with a voice like gravel and eyes like a bloodhound, had already called her twice that morning. The syndicate was facing a hostile acquisition attempt from a media conglomerate out of Boston. Jobs were being cut. Elena's position, prestigious as it was not secure. Gerald knew it. Elena knew it. And yet the thought of staying, of fighting for an institution that was already half dead, felt like swallowing glass. She thought about her father, who had worked double shifts at a printing press for 15 years so she could attend private school. She thought about her mother, who had learned English from watching PBF and reading paperback romance novels, who still kept a clippings folder of every single one of Elena's articles. She thought about the weight of the Marchetti name, the legacy she was supposed to carry forward like a torch through a dark room. Then she thought about the next 30 years of her life, and she made her choice. She hit send. The 6 months that followed were the strangest of Elena's life. She told her parents she was taking a sabbatical. She told her friends she was traveling. She told herself she was finding herself, which was the kind of phrase that made her want to vomit, except that it was also true. She bought a one-way ticket to Lisbon, then Morocco, then a small guest house in the Catskills where a friend of a friend knew someone who knew someone. She read novels she had never had time to read. She drank wine on terraces overlooking oceans. She walked through cities whose languages she didn't speak and felt, for the first time in years, completely untethered from the weight of expectation. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the most honest she had ever been with herself. And somewhere in the middle of it, in a hostel in Barcelona, lying on a narrow bed in a room that smelled of damp stone and cheap lavender detergent, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like the outline of a woman's face, Elena Marchetti made a decision. She was done being the lioness. She was done being the brilliant daughter, the dutiful child, the young prodigy. She wanted something new. She wanted power. Not the soft, indirect power of bylines and public opinion, but the real thing, the kind that moved markets, that changed narratives, that could make or break empires with a single conversation in a corner office. She wanted to be inside the room where it happened. The opportunity came through a contact, a professor from her Columbia journalism days named Adrian Cross, who had left academia to become a senior advisor at Global Media Holdings, the media empire that dominated the New York skyline like a granite and glass fortress. Adrian had always liked Elena. He called her the real thing once at a faculty dinner, which Elena understood to be the highest compliment a middle-aged man of letters could pay to a 20-something woman. When she reached out, he responded within the hour. "You want to come work for the devil?" he wrote. "I thought you'd never ask. Let's talk." The Global Media Holdings building on 6th Avenue was the kind of building that made you feel small without trying. 62 stories of limestone and steel. It rose out of the Manhattan grid like a monument to capitalism's most triumphant instincts. The lobby was a cathedral of Italian marble, with a ceiling that soared so high the light at the top seemed to come from another world entirely. Elena walked through it on a Tuesday morning in October, wearing a charcoal blazer and heels that clicked against the floor like a metronome, and felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She was meeting with HR, ostensibly. A junior editorial position had opened up at one of GMH's flagship publication, a prestige monthly called The Continental, known for its long-form investigations and its literary ambition. Elena's CV, padded with the Sentinel's pedigree and Adrian Cross's personal endorsement, had gotten her an interview. Nothing was guaranteed, but everything was possible. The HR director was a thin, precise woman named Patricia Okafor, who asked Elena a series of questions about her 5-year plan and her approach to conflict resolution with a detached smile that suggested she had asked these questions 1,000 times before. Elena answered carefully, calibrating each response to project both ambition and team player agreeability, a balance she had spent years learning to strike. She was in the middle of explaining her philosophy of narrative-driven journalism when the door opened. Patricia looked up. Her face changed. A man stepped into the room. He was tall, 6'2" or 3", Elena guessed, with silver threading through temples that were otherwise dark as ink. He wore a suit that cost more than Elena's monthly rent, and he wore it the way some men wore uniforms, with the easy authority of someone who had never been told he couldn't pull something off. His eyes were brown, almost amber in certain light, and when they found Elena's across the conference table, something passed between them that she felt in the pit of her stomach like a stone dropping into still water. "Patricia," he said, and his voice was exactly what she expected, low, modulated, carrying the faintest suggestion of a mid-Atlantic accent that probably came from a decade spent in boardrooms rather than childhood. "I didn't realize you were in the middle of something." "We were just finishing," Patricia said, and her voice had gone up half an octave, which Elena found fascinating. "Elena Marchetti, may I introduce Vincent Ashford, our Chief Content Officer." Vincent Ashford. Elena knew the name, of course. Everyone in media knew the name. He was the Vanderkind who had transformed GMH from a struggling newspaper conglomerate into a global entertainment and publishing dynasty. He was rumored to have connections in Washington, in Hollywood, in places where the lines between journalism and power became deliberately, profitably blurred. He was 48 years old and divorced, and allegedly dating a supermodel whose name Elena could never remember. He was, in short, exactly the kind of man Elena had spent her entire career preparing herself to either become or destroy. "Elena Marchetti," Vincent said, and he crossed the room and took her hand, and his grip was warm and firm and lasted exactly 1 beat longer than necessary. Adrian has told me a great deal about you. He says you're the best natural storyteller he's taught in 20 years. Adrian exaggerates, Elena said. But I appreciate the sentiment. Something flickered in Vincent's amber eyes, amusement or recognition, or the particular spark of a man who enjoyed being challenged. I think, he said, that we should talk. Not about HR protocols. Not about job descriptions. About what you actually want. Patricia excused herself with the particular speed of a woman who understood she had become irrelevant. The door clicked shut. Denson settled into the chair across from Lena, crossing one leg over the other with the practiced ease of a man who had spent decades in rooms where every gesture was observed and interpreted. What do you actually want, Elena? He asked. She could have given him the safe answer. She could have talked about editorial integrity and long-form journalism and the public's right to know. She could have performed the role of the idealistic young journalist, the crusader with a notebook and a conscience. Instead, she looked at him directly, without flinching, and said, I want to be powerful. I want to be in the room where decisions get made. I want to understand how the machinery of influence actually works, not just how it's supposed to work. Vincent smiled. It was a slow smile, spreading across his face like light through water. Good, he said. That's the first honest thing anyone in this building has said to me in months. A week later, Elena received a text from a number she didn't recognize. Asterisk Elena, Vincent Ashford. I got your number from Adrian. I hope you don't mind. There's a small academic conference next week at Columbia, The Future of Narrative Journalism, and I thought of you immediately. Would you like to be my guest? I have a standing invitation, but I never attend these things alone. It would be nice to have someone intelligent to talk to. Elena stared at the message for a long time. She was sitting in her apartment in the West Village, a sublet from a friend who was on a fellowship in Berlin, barely large enough to hold a bed and a desk, and the October light was slanting through the window in long gold bars that made the dust motes look like tiny planets drifting through a universe of their own. She knew she should say no. She knew what this was. The text was too casual, too carefully casual, the kind of artful informality that a man like Vincent Ashford would deploy with the precision of a chess move. He was interested. He was making his interest known. And Elena Marchetti, who had spent her entire career studying the way power operated in the world, understood exactly what she was walking into. She texted back, I'd love to. Where should I meet you? The response came within seconds. I'll send a car. Thursday, 7 p.m. We're something comfortable. We're going to a private club afterward. A private club. Of course. The club was called the Maison Privée, and it existed behind a door on East 57th Street that looked like every other door on the block. Brushed steel, no sign, a single camera lens that blinked once as Elena approached. She was wearing a black dress that hit just above the knee and heels that made her feel simultaneously powerful and exposed. Her hair was down, which she never wore it down professionally, and she kept pushing it behind her ears out of habit before catching herself and stopping. The door opened before she could knock. A man in a dark suit nodded her through into a corridor lined with abstract expressionist paintings, genuine Rothkos and Motherwells, worth more than Elena's entire net worth, and led her to an elevator that rose without sound to the 4th floor. The doors opened onto a dining room that took her breath away. It was not large. That was the first thing she noticed. Perhaps 15 tables, each one placed at a distance from the others that suggested deliberate privacy, separated by carved mahogany partitions and the strategic placement of ferns and bronze pots. The walls were the color of old cream, lit by wall sconces that cast everything in a warm, amber glow. A string quartet played something she couldn't identify, Debussy, maybe, or Satie, and the music drifted through the room like a second atmosphere. Denton was already there. He stood when he saw her, and the gesture was so old-fashioned, so deliberately courtly, that Elena felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. He was wearing a charcoal suit with an ivory shirt and no tie, the top button undone in a way that suggested he could afford to be careless. His hair was slightly less perfect than it had been at the office, as though he had spent the afternoon running his hands through it, and Elena found herself wondering what else he might do with his hands if given the chance. "Elena," he said, and he took her hand again, that same warm, firm grip, and this time he lifted it to his lips. The brush of his mouth against her knuckles lasted exactly 1 second. "You look extraordinary." "Thank you," she said. "So do you. I'm 100 years old. I look like what I am. You look like a man who knows how to get what he wants." His eyes lit up. "I like you," he said. "Sit. I've ordered already. I hope you don't mind, I took a risk. The chef here does a tasting menu that changes nightly based on what's fresh at the market. I thought it might be interesting." They sat. A sommelier appeared with a wine list that Elena deliberately didn't look at, because she knew that whatever Vincent had already ordered would be either obscenely expensive or perfectly chosen, or both. The first course arrived, a single, perfect oyster on a bed of ice, with a shot glass of something pale and sparkling beside it. "Cucumber granita," Vincent explained. "To cleanse the palate. You're supposed to eat the oyster first, then drink the granita. I think the granita first is more interesting. What do you think?" "Oyster first," Elena said. "Tradition exists for a reason. Even when tradition is arbitrary? Especially then. Arbitrariness is the point. Ritual is how humans impose meaning on chaos." Vincent laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not a Boardman laughs, and Elena felt the sound of it move through her like a current. "You really are a journalist," he said. "Everything is an argument with you. Everything is an argument with everyone. Most people just don't realize they're making one." The meal progressed through courses that Elena couldn't name and didn't try to. There was a soup that was the color of autumn leaves and tasted of chanterelles and thyme. There was a piece of fish so delicate it seemed to dissolve on her tongue, served with a sauce that glistened like liquid gold. There were vegetables from some farm upstate that had been grown specifically for this restaurant, each one a tiny masterpiece of cultivation and care. Vincent talked through all of it, about journalism, about the state of the media industry, about the way narratives were constructed and deconstructed in the age of social media. He was funny and opinionated and occasionally infuriating, and Elena found herself leaning forward more and more as the evening wore on, drawn in by the sheer intellectual energy of him. And then the shrimp came. It was a simple dish, really. Just large Gulf shrimp, grilled and served with a lemon butter that caught the candlelight like a small, edible sunrise. Vincent picked one up with his fingers, and Elena watched as he peeled it, with a care and deliberation that seemed almost ritualistic, and then held it out to her on the tips of his fork. "I always do this," he said. "My mother taught me. When you share food with someone, you feed them with your own hands, you acknowledge them. It's the oldest human ritual there is." Elena leaned forward and took the shrimp from his fork. Their eyes met. The moment stretched. "You're a romantic," she said. "I'm a cynic who occasionally lapses into romance. There's a difference." "Is there?" Vincent smiled. "I suppose that's the question, isn't it?" After dinner, they moved to a private room, a small, wood-paneled space with a fireplace that was already lit and a leather couch that looked like it had been designed for either serious business or serious sin. Vincent ordered coffee, which arrived in a French press that the waiter poured with the ceremony of a sommelier opening a great vintage. The coffee smelled of cardamom and dark chocolate. "Tell me something," Danton said, settling into the couch with a grace that made Elena think of panthers or princes. Creatures who had never known a world that wasn't theirs to command. "Tell me about the moment you decided to leave the Sentinel." Elena was quiet for a moment. She was aware of the fire, of the way its light played across Vincent's features and made him look simultaneously younger and older than his years. She was aware of the intimacy of the room, of the way the shadows pooled in the corners like ink. "I didn't decide," she said finally. "I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend that the institution mattered more than the people inside it. I couldn't keep telling myself that the bylines were worth the compromises. I wanted," she stopped. "I wanted to start over. From nothing. From scratch." "That's not nothing," Vincent said. "That's everything." "Meaning?" "Meaning that most people never find the courage to walk away from the life they'd built. They stay in jobs they hate, in marriages that have gone cold, in cities that drain them, because the fear of starting over is worse than the pain of staying put. You walked away from the Marchetti legacy, from everything your parents sacrificed, from a career that most people would kill for. That takes a kind of courage most people can't even imagine. You make it sound heroic. It is heroic. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Elena looked at him. The firelight was catching in his amber eyes, turning them to gold. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why did you invite me here tonight?" "Because I wanted to see you," Vincent said. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you after that meeting in the conference room. Because," he paused, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed uncertain. "Because I think you might be the most interesting person I've met in years, and I don't say that lightly. I spend my life in rooms full of interesting people. Most of them are boring in their interestingness, if you know what I mean. You're not. You're different." "Different how?" "Different in a way that makes me want to know more. And I'm a man who has learned, over the years, to trust that impulse." The silence that followed was charged. Elena could feel it in her skin, in the base of her throat, in the quickening of her pulse. She knew what was happening. She had known since the moment he walked into that conference room. This was the catastrophe she had been walking towards since she was old enough to understand that desire and danger were often the same thing. "Karaoke," she said. Vincent blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You mentioned it in the text. Something about karaoke afterward. I assume that offer still stands." A slow smile spread across his face. "It does. There's a private room upstairs. Shall we?" The karaoke room was smaller than Elena expected, and more luxurious. A soundproofed space with velvet curtains the color of burgundy wine, a projection screen that dominated one wall, and a leather armchair that might have been designed for a sultan. A machine in the corner offered a seemingly infinite catalog of songs, displayed in luminous fonts that scrolled through genres and decades with a single touch. Danton excused himself to speak to someone, a manager, maybe, or an associate, and Elena found herself alone for a moment, standing in the middle of the room with the strange sensation that she had stepped outside the normal current of her life and entered some parallel stream where the rules were different, the consequences were different, the very fabric of possibility was different. When he returned, he was carrying a glass of something amber and sparkling. He handed it to her. "Champagne cocktail," he said. "The house specialty. Be careful, it goes down easy." They ordered songs. Vincent insisted that Elena go first, and after some deliberation she chose one, a heartbreak song, something by an artist she had loved in college, about a love affair that had ended badly and the long, slow process of learning to live with the wreckage. The opening notes filled the room, and Elena closed her eyes, and she sang. She had a good voice, not professionally trained, but true, with a raw edge that suited the material. She put everything into the song, every sleepless night she had spent in her apartment in the West Village, every moment of doubt and fear and desperate hope that had accompanied her decision to walk away from the Sentinel, every ounce of the loneliness she had carried since childhood like a secret stone in her chest. She sang about the man she had loved in graduate school, the one who had left her for a woman with better connections and a trust fund. She sang about her father, who had worked himself to the bone and never complained and died of a heart attack at 62, 3 months after Elena's last visit home. She sang about the weight of the Marchetti name and the weight of her own ambition and the terrifying lightness of being truly, completely alone. When she finished, she opened her eyes. Danton was watching her. His face was very still, very close, and the look in his eyes was something she couldn't name, recognition, maybe, or hunger, or the particular anguish of a man who sees his own pain reflected in another's voice. "That song," he said quietly. "I know it. I know it very well." "Of course you do. Everyone knows it." "No, I mean," he stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, and she could see that the gesture was not performed, not calculated, but genuine. "I mean that when I was 22, I sang that song to a woman I loved. She was the first love of my life. Her name was Claire. We were going to get married. And then," he looked away, "and then she left me. For someone else. Someone safer. Someone who wouldn't have spent the next 20 years climbing ladders and breaking hearts and becoming the kind of man who goes to places like this. Vincent, I haven't thought about that song in 20 years. I made myself forget it. And then you stood in that conference room and introduced yourself, and I felt something I haven't felt since I was 22 years old, and so in love I thought I might die from it." The room seemed to contract around them. The music had stopped. There was only the sound of their breathing, and the distant murmur of the city far below, and the specific gravity of a moment that could not be taken back. "I should put on another song," Elena said, but she didn't move. "Elena." She looked at him. "Don't," he said. "Not yet. Just stay here. Stay in this moment. Just for a second." She stayed. He put on the song. The one they used to sing together, Claire and him, and he held out his hand to Elena with a formality that felt almost absurd in the context of everything that had led them here. She took his hand. His palm was warm, slightly dry, and she could feel the calluses on his fingers, a detail that surprised her, some remnant of a life before the suits and the corner offices, some trace of the boy he had been before he became the man. They sang together. Their voices blended in a way that seemed almost supernatural, rising and falling in perfect sync, as if they had been singing this song together for years instead of minutes. Elena felt the lyrics in her bones, about love and loss and the terrible, beautiful persistence of memory, and she understood that something was happening to her that she could not control, could not analyze, could not reduce to the comfortable language of narrative and cause and effect. When the music stopped, they were standing very close together. Elena could feel the heat of his body, could smell his cologne, something dark and resinous, like pine forests at night. She could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, the particular architecture of a face that had been photographed 1,000 times and still, in this moment, seemed entirely private. "Elena," Vincent said, and his voice was rough. And then he kissed her. It was not a tentative kiss, not a questioning one. It was a kiss that came from somewhere deep and ancient, a kiss that carried the weight of every song they had just sung, every story they had just told each other, every lie and truth that had passed between them since the moment he walked into that conference room. His hands found her face, cupping her cheeks with a tenderness that contradicted the hunger of his mouth, and Elena felt herself dissolving, felt herself becoming someone new, someone she had never been before. 20 minutes. She would later calculate that it was 20 minutes, though time had ceased to function normally somewhere around the 3-minute mark. 20 minutes of his mouth on hers, of his hands in her hair, of the heat of him pressing against her until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. 20 minutes of pure, annihilating want. And then his hand found her thigh. It was a small thing, really. A shift in pressure, a move from her waist to the fabric of her dress, a suggestion of escalation that cut through the haze of the kiss like a blade through silk. Elena's body reacted before her mind did. She reached down and pushed his hand away, gently but firmly, and the motion broke the spell just enough for her to breathe. Vincent stepped back. His face was flushed, his lips slightly swollen, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. He looked like a man who had just survived something catastrophic. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it. She could tell that he meant it. "Don't be," Elena said. "But, not yet. I need to think." "Of course. I understand." They stood there for a moment, the distance between them already feeling like a wound. The karaoke machine glowed in the corner, patient and indifferent. Somewhere outside, the city continued its relentless churn, indifferent to the small, seismic shifts that were occurring in this room. "Can I drive you home?" Vincent asked. "Yes," Elena said. "I think I'd like that." The car was a black sedan with tinted windows that appeared almost instantly when Vincent texted. The driver said nothing as they slid into the back seat, as he pulled away from the curb and merged into the river of taillights going down Fifth Avenue. Elena and Vincent sat side by side, the space between them charged with everything that had happened and everything that had not yet happened. Vincent reached over and took her hand. He held it gently, almost formally, as though they were in the back of a church instead of a car. His thumb traced small circles on her palm, an absent, soothing motion that Elena found more intimate than the kiss. "I should tell you," he said quietly, "that I'm married. I know. I should tell you that nothing about this is simple. I know that too." "Then why are you here?" Elena looked at him. The city lights were sliding past the window, painting shifting geometries of gold and shadow across his face. She thought about her father, who had loved her mother with a steadfastness that had never wavered, who had shown her through his own example what devotion looked like when it was real. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed everything for a man and a family and a country that were not her own, who had taught Elena that love was not a feeling but a practice, a daily choice made in small moments and small gestures. She thought about the Marchetti name and the weight of legacy, and the woman she had been 6 months ago when she walked into that newsroom for the last time. "Because I don't know how to want something moderately," she said. "Because when I want something, I want it completely. And right now, I want you." Denson was silent for a long time. The car turned onto a quiet side street, and for a moment the only sound was the hum of the engine and the soft whisper of tires on asphalt. "That's the most dangerous thing anyone has ever said to me," he said. "I know. I should take you home. I should apologize. I should pretend this never happened. Should you? I don't know." He looked at her, and his eyes were very tired, and very honest, and very afraid. "I don't know anything anymore. You have that effect on me. It's terrifying. The car pulled up in front of Elena's building. The West Village was quiet at this hour, the brownstone sleeping under a skin of lamplight and autumn leaves. Densett leaned forward and spoke to the driver, a few words in a low voice, and then he turned back to Elena. "May I come up?" She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to say no, to get out of the car, to walk into her apartment and lock the door and never think about Vincent Ashford again. But Elena Marchetti had never been a woman who made rational choices. She had made brilliant choices, and reckless ones, and ones that had cost her everything she thought she wanted. She had made choices that no one else could understand, and she had lived with the consequences, and she had survived. "No," she said. "Not tonight. But call me. Tomorrow. Or don't. But don't disappear. I won't disappear. Promise me." He took her face in his hands again, that same tender, devastating gesture, and he kissed her forehead, her eyelids, the corners of her mouth. "I promise," he said. "I promise." She watched the taillights disappear around the corner, and then she walked into her building, and she climbed the stairs to her apartment on the 4th floor, and she stood in the dark for a long time, feeling the ghost of his hands on her skin. She thought about the story she would tell herself about tonight. She would frame it as a warning, probably. A cautionary tale about the seductions of power, about the way desire could cloud judgment, about the particular peril of wanting something you couldn't have. She would write it in the dispassionate language of narrative analysis, the vocabulary of cause and effect, the clinical terminology of a journalist who had been trained to see the world as a collection of patterns waiting to be decoded. But tonight, in the dark, with the taste of champagne and his mouth still on hers, she did not write that story. Tonight, she simply felt it. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of Elena's life. She got the job at the Continental. Dason made sure of it, not through any explicit pressure, she suspected, but through the simple gravity of his attention, which was a kind of power in itself. Patricia Okafor called her on a Thursday afternoon to offer her the junior editorial position, and when Elena accepted, there was a warmth in Patricia's voice that hadn't been there during the interview. Word had gotten around, apparently. The chief content officer had taken an interest in the new hire. Elena tried not to think about what that meant. She tried to focus on the work, the long articles, the careful edits, the endless meetings where she learned the particular language and culture of a publication that operated on an entirely different scale than the Sentinel. She tried to be professional. She tried to be appropriate. She tried to maintain the boundaries that had separated the personal from the transactional, the private from the institutional. But Vincent was everywhere. He appeared at editorial meetings where she hadn't expected him, sitting at the far end of the conference table, reading documents on a tablet with the focused attention of a man who had built an empire one careful decision at a time. He commented on her articles, always constructively, always intelligently, always with an undertone of something personal that she couldn't quite name. He sent her messages through the internal company system, professional in tone, impeccable in grammar, each one containing a subtext that was visible to her alone. * Your piece on the opioid crisis is extraordinary. The 3rd paragraph is the best thing I've read on the subject in years. The *** coffee later? I want to pick your brain about the new investigative series. There's a corner booth at the executive cafe that's surprisingly private. ***, you're wearing the color of the dress you wore to Maison Privée. Coincidence? She wore the dress again 3 weeks after the karaoke night, and when she walked into the office and saw his face, the flicker of recognition that crossed his features before he controlled it, she felt something ignite in her chest that she knew she should not feel. They had coffee. Once, twice, 3 times. Each meeting was innocent on the surface, two colleagues discussing the future of narrative journalism, the changing landscape of media, the particular challenges of maintaining editorial integrity in an age of shrinking attention spans. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. A slow, inexorable drift toward a point of no return. He told her about his marriage. His wife, Diana, was a sculptor, talented, distant, increasingly absorbed in her work and her own circle of artists and collectors. They had been married for 15 years. They had no children, by choice or by circumstance. Elena wasn't sure which. They lived in a townhouse on the Upper East Side that was filled with Diana's work and very little else. They had not slept in the same bed for 3 years. "It's not unhappily ever after," Vincent said. They were in the corner booth at the executive cafe, and his coffee had gone cold, and his eyes were the color of winter. "It's just over. We've been waiting for the courage to say it out loud, and neither of us has found it yet. There are 12, a family, lawyers. The machinery of ending a marriage is so enormous that sometimes it's easier to just keep living in it." "Does she know about us?" "She knows I'm unhappy. She knows I've been paying attention on Elf. She's not stupid." "Has she said anything?" Vincent smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "She asked me if I was having a midlife crisis. I told her I hoped not, because I intended to live to 100. Elena laughed, in spite of everything. "What did she say?" "She said that would be inconvenient." And then she went back to her studio. The breaking point came on a night in late November. There was a company event, an anniversary celebration for the Continental, marking 25 years of publication. The venue was a private club on the roof of a building in Tribeca, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the Manhattan skyline that made Elena's breath catch every time she looked at it. The city spread out below them like a circuit board of light and shadow, and for a moment Elena felt the full weight of her own smallness, the particular insignificance of one woman's life against the vast, indifferent machinery of the metropolis. She wore a dress that she had bought specifically for this occasion, deep green velvet, fitted at the waist, with a neckline that was daring without being vulgar. She had spent an hour on her hair and makeup, and when she looked in the mirror before leaving her apartment, she barely recognized herself. She looked like a woman who belonged in rooms like this. She looked like a woman who had finally become the thing she had always wanted to be. Vincent was there, of course. He was always everywhere. He was talking to a cluster of investors near the bar when she walked in, and when he saw her, the conversation simply stopped. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he wants so badly it hurts, not with lust, exactly, though that was part of it, but with something deeper, something more frightened. He looked at her like she was a disaster he had been waiting for his whole life. They danced. Someone had hired a band, a quartet playing standards from the Great American Songbook, and Vincent asked Elena to dance with a formality that felt almost theatrical. She said yes. They moved to the floor, and he held her with a distance that was its own kind of intimacy, and for a few minutes they simply existed in the music, two people moving through space in a way that spoke louder than words. "You're magnificent," Vincent said quietly, near her ear. His breath was warm on her skin. "So are you. I'm 100 years old and I haven't slept properly in a month. You have that effect on me. I haven't slept either. I know. I can see it in your eyes. They're different." "Different how?" "More alive. More dangerous." She pulled back slightly and looked at him. The band was playing something slow and melancholy, something that sounded like a question that had no answer. Around them, the other couples moved in their own private orbit, absorbed in their own small dramas, their own small catastrophes. "Vincent," she said, "what are we doing?" "I don't know. We can't keep doing this." "I know. I have to make a decision. About whether to stay or go. About whether to pursue this or let it die." "I know. So tell me. What do you want?" He was quiet for a long time. The music swelled and faded, and the city hummed beyond the windows, and somewhere in the building below them a kitchen was preparing food that would be served to people who had no idea that the world was shifting on its axis in this room, right now, in this dance. "I want you," Vincent said. "I want you in a way that I have never wanted anything in my entire life. I want to wake up next to you. I want to fight with you about something stupid and then make up in a way that makes the fight worth it. I want to introduce you to people as the woman I'm seeing. I want to hold your hand in public and not care who sees. I want," he stopped. His voice had gone rough. "I want a life with you. A real life. The kind of life I gave up on when I married the wrong person for the wrong reasons and spent the next 15 years pretending it was enough." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back. She would not cry. "Not here. Not now." "That's not an answer," she said. "Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is." The music stopped. The applause scattered through the room, polite and automatic. Deason stepped back, and the distance between them felt like a physical thing, a wall made of everything they couldn't say. "I have to go," he said. "There's a meeting, in the morning, an early flight. I understand," Elena said. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw everything, every doubt, every fear, every ounce of the desire he had spent weeks trying to contain. And then he turned and walked away, and she watched him go, and she understood with perfect, terrible clarity that she could not let him walk away. "Vincent," she called after him. He stopped. He turned. "Saturday," she said. "My apartment. 7 o'clock. Bring wine." Saturday came. Saturday came slowly, like a tide retreating from a shore it would later destroy. Elena spent the days between Tuesday and Saturday in a state of suspended animation. She went to work. She edited articles. She sat in meetings and contributed insights that her colleagues received with nods of approval. She answered emails and returned phone calls and performed all the small rituals of professional life with a competence that surprised even her. But underneath all of it, a clock was ticking. A countdown was running. And every hour that passed brought her closer to a moment she knew she could not take back. She cleaned her apartment. She bought new sheets, a high thread count in a soft ivory that she ran her hands over and imagined him running his hands over too. She filled a vase with white tulips, which she didn't usually like but which seemed right for this occasion, formal, delicate, the kind of flower you might give someone you were trying to impress. She made a list of things to talk about and then crumpled it. She made a list of things not to say and then burned that too. At 6:30, she changed clothes 3 times. She settled on something simple, black trousers, a cream silk blouse, bare feet on the hardwood floor. She wanted to look like herself. She wanted him to see her, the real her, not the armor she usually wore. At 7 o'clock exactly, there was a knock on her door. Denson stood in the hallway with a bottle of wine in one hand and a look on his face that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. He was wearing a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, clothes that made him look younger, less armored, more like the man he might had been if he had made different choices 20 years ago. His hair was slightly disheveled. His eyes were very bright. "Hi," he said. "Hi. I brought the wine. Come in." He stepped inside, and she closed the door behind him, and for a moment they simply stood there in her small apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her solitary life, the books on the shelf, the notebooks on the desk, the city lights flickering through the window. He looked around with an expression she couldn't read. "It's you," he said quietly. "This is so completely you. All these books. All this," he gestured at the walls, at the carefully curated absence of clutter. "You live like you write. With intention. I don't know any other way to live. I know. That's why He stopped. He set the wine down on her kitchen counter. He turned to face her. "Elena, I need to tell you something. Okay. I left Diana last night. I told her I wanted a divorce." Elena's heart stopped. Then it started again, at a different rhythm, a faster, more dangerous tempo. "Vincent, I know what you're going to say. I know this is too fast, and too complicated, and too much. I know I should have waited. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I spent 3 days thinking about what you said at the party, about needing to make a decision, and I realized that I had already made mine. A long time ago, before I even knew your name." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. His grip was warm and slightly unsteady, and she could feel his pulse through his palms. "I want to be with you," he said. "Not because you're beautiful, though you are. Not because you're brilliant, though you are. Because you make me want to be the man I thought I was going to be when I was 22 and Claire left me and I swore I would never be that vulnerable again. You make me want to take risks. You make me want to be honest. You make me want," he laughed, and the sound was half sob, half wonder. "You make me want to feel things again. Really feel them. Not the small feelings I'd been living on for the past 20 years, but the big ones. The terrifying ones. The ones that could destroy me." Elena looked at him. She thought about her father, who had loved her mother with a steadfastness that had never wavered. She thought about the Marchetti name and the weight of legacy, and the woman she had been 6 months ago when she walked into that newsroom for the last time. She thought about the story she would tell herself about tonight, the cautionary tale, the narrative of caution and consequence, the journalist's clinical analysis of her own destruction. And then she stopped thinking. She kissed him. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Elena's life. She knew this was dangerous. She knew that happiness like this sudden, overwhelming, all-consuming happiness, was the kind that the universe noticed and then corrected, usually in ways that left scars. But she couldn't stop herself. She couldn't help herself. She was in love, truly and completely in love, and the feeling was unlike anything she had ever experienced, more intense than the first flush of ambition, more sustaining than the pride of a byline, more real than anything she had allowed herself to feel in years. They saw each other every day. Not always at the office, they were careful about that, maintaining the professional boundaries that separated the personal from the transactional, but in the mornings, before work, over coffee at a diner on 7th Avenue that Vincent swore was the best in the city. In the evenings, at restaurants that ranged from elegant to anonymous. On weekends, at her apartment or his townhouse, which was exactly as cold and beautiful as she had imagined, filled with Diana sculptures and very little else. She learned the geography of him. The scar on his left shoulder from a sailing accident when he was 19. The way he took his coffee, black, no sugar, always slightly too hot. the sound he made when he was thinking, a low hum in the back of his throat that she found inexplicably endearing. The books he kept on his nightstand, biography, mostly, and philosophy, and the occasional thriller that he read for pleasure without apology. She learned his rhythms, his moods, the particular architecture of his silences. She told him about herself, about her father, who had died of a heart attack at 62, 3 months after her last visit home. About her mother, who still kept a clippings folder of every single one of her articles, who still called every Sunday at exactly 4 p.m. Eastern Time to ask if she was eating enough and sleeping enough and taking care of herself. About the boy in graduate school who had left her for a woman with better connections and a trust fund, and the years it had taken her to trust anyone again. About the weight of the Marchetti name and the expectation and the loneliness she had carried since childhood like a secret stone in her chest. He listened. He remembered. He made her feel, for the first time in her life, completely seen. "I want to meet your mother," he said one evening. They were lying in her bed, in the ivory sheets she had bought for him, watching the city lights flicker through the window. His hand was tracing slow patterns on her bare shoulder. "You can't. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because she's going to ask you 100 questions about your intentions, and she's going to disapprove of the age gap, and she's going to look at you and see her own sacrifices reflected in my choices, and it's going to be a disaster. You underestimate yourself. You're the strongest person I know. I'm strong in the ways that matter for journalism. I'm not strong in the ways that matter for this." "What do you mean?" Elena was quiet for a moment. She could feel the weight of his arm across her waist, the warmth of his body against her back. She could hear the city humming beyond the window, that particular frequency of urban life that she had learned to tune out and that now, in this moment, seemed to be singing just for them. "I mean that I've spent my whole life being the lioness," she said. "Being the brilliant one. Being the one who had everything figured out. And I don't know how to be the woman who needs someone. I don't know how to be vulnerable. I don't know how to admit that I'm terrified of losing this, because admitting it makes it more real, and if it's real then it can be taken away." Denson turned her to face him. His eyes were very serious in the dim light. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said. "Not with me. That's the point. That's what this is. You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after, and every day for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." She kissed him. She kissed him and felt, for a moment, that everything was possible. But the world, as Elena had learned long ago, did not permit happiness without cost. The divorce was ugly. Diana, it turned out, had not been prepared for the finality of what Vincent was asking. She had assumed, perhaps, that the distance between them was temporary, a rough patch that would eventually smooth itself out through the slow erosion of time and habit. She had not expected him to actually leave. And when he did, she fought back, with lawyers, with accusations, with the particular venom of a woman who felt herself being abandoned. There were depositions. There were asset negotiations. There were conversations in conference rooms with blinds drawn and voices lowered, conversations that left Elena feeling complicit in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She told herself it wasn't her fault, that Vincent had made his choice, that Diana had made hers, that the marriage had been over long before she came along, but the guilt was there, a low hum beneath everything, impossible to silence completely. And then there was the press. It started with a whisper, a gossip item in one of the tabloids that covered the media industry, mentioning that Vincent Ashford, the chief content officer of Global Media Holdings, had separated from his wife of 15 years. The item was brief, almost throwaway, but it was enough. It was enough to trigger the machinery of speculation, the endless parsing of who and why and what it meant. Elena's name didn't appear in the first article or the second, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She had been seen with Vincent at the anniversary party. She had been seen with him at dinners, at coffees, at the diner on 7th Avenue where the owner had started giving them a booth near the back without being asked. She had been seen, and someone had noticed, and the notice had been filed away for future use. She mentioned it to Vincent on a Thursday evening, lying in his bed in the townhouse that was slowly, week by week, becoming as much hers as his. She had brought Thai food, which they were eating straight from the containers with a particular disregard of people who had stopped pretending to be formal with each other. "There's going to be a story," she said, "about us. It's only a matter of time." Vincent put down his container of pad Thai. His expression was very calm, the calm of a man who had spent decades managing crises and understood that panic was never useful. "I know. What are we going to do? Tell the truth. Control the narrative. If we let them tell it, they'll tell it wrong. The truth is that you're leaving your wife for your employee. That's not a story that ends well." "No," Vincent agreed. "It's not." He took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, and she tried to draw strength from it. "I can transfer you," he said, "to the London office. A year, maybe 2, until things cool down. You'd have editorial autonomy, a bigger platform, a chance to build something new. And then, when the divorce is finalized, when the press has moved on to someone else's drama, we could come back. Start over. Properly." Elena stared at him. "London. A year. 2 years. The slow, patient work of building a career in a foreign city, of establishing a new life that would carry her away from everything she had fought to build in New York." "You're asking me to run," she said. "I'm asking you to be strategic. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Elena." His voice was very gentle. "I know you're not a woman who runs. I know that's one of the things you love about yourself. But sometimes running is the only way to win. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step back and wait for the right moment to advance." She pulled her hand away. She sat up in bed, the sheets pooling around her waist, and she looked at him, this man she loved, this man who had transformed her life in the space of a few weeks, this man who was asking her to sacrifice everything she had just regained. "I didn't leave the Sentinel to run," she said. "I left it because I was tired of being strategic all the time. I was tired of calculating every move, every word, every relationship. I wanted to be free. And now you're asking me to do the opposite. I'm asking you to be patient. Freedom isn't the same as having no constraints. You know that." "Do I?" He sat up too, and now they were facing each other in the half-dark, two people in a bed that was too large for the distance between them. "I'm not asking you to give up anything you don't want to give up. I'm offering you an opportunity. London is a great city. You'd be brilliant there. And I'd come with you. As much as I could. As often as I could. Long distance. For 2 years. For a little while. Until we can be together properly. And then? And then we figure out the rest. Together." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, the way she had trusted him since that first night at Maison Privée, the way she had trusted him when he told her he had left Diana, the way she had trusted him every time he made a promise that seemed too large to keep. But there was a voice in her head, her father's voice, maybe, or the voice of every cautionary tale she had ever read that whispered, "Be careful. Be very careful. This is the moment. This is where it all goes wrong." She said no. She said no on a Sunday morning in his kitchen over coffee that had gone cold because they had been talking for hours and neither of them had remembered to drink it. She said no, and she watched his face as she said it, and she saw the flicker of something, disappointment, maybe, or the particular frustration of a man who was not used to being denied. "I can't leave New York," she said. "Not now. Not for you. Not for anyone. Elena, I've spent my whole life building something. A career. A reputation. A name. I left the Sentinel because I wanted to be free, but I also left it because I wanted more power, more influence, more of the kind of impact that changes things. London would be a step backward. A lateral move disguised as an adventure. This isn't about the career. This is about us. Everything is about the career. That's who I am. That's who you've fallen in love with." He was quiet for a long time. The morning light was coming through the window, pale and winter thin, and the kitchen was very still. "If you stay," he said finally, "things are going to get difficult. The press. Diana. The board. There are people at GMH who have wanted me gone for years, and this is the kind of ammunition they can use. Against me, against you, against everything we're trying to build. I know. You could get hurt. You could lose your job. You could lose your reputation. I know. And you're willing to risk all of that?" Elena looked at him. She thought about the Marchetti name and the weight of legacy, and her father who had worked double shifts so she could attend private school. She thought about her mother, who had learned English from watching PDS and still called every Sunday at 4 p.m. to ask if she was eating enough. She thought about the lioness and the woman she had been 6 months ago, and the woman she was becoming now, stronger, braver, more herself than she had ever been. "I'm willing to risk all of that," she said, "because the alternative is giving up the only thing that has ever felt more important than my career. And I'm not ready to do that. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Denson looked at her for a long moment. And then, slowly, he smiled. "You're extraordinary," he said. "You know that? I've been told. I mean it. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met. And I'm not going to let you face this alone." The story broke on a Wednesday. Not in the tabloids, as Elena had expected, but in a trade publication called Media Insider, which covered the media industry with the kind of relentless, insider focus that made it essential reading for everyone who worked in the field. The headline was, "GMH Content Cheese High-Profile Romance, Internal Politics or Genuine Connection?" The article was 4,000 words long and devastating in its precision. It detailed Vincent's separation from Diana, the timeline of his involvement with Elena, the speculation about what it meant for the company's editorial direction. It quoted anonymous sources, a senior executive familiar with the matter, an insider close to the board, a colleague of Ms. Marchetti's who requested anonymity, who raised questions about whether Elena's rapid rise at the Continental had been influenced by her relationship with the chief content officer. Elena read the article in her office, sitting at her desk with the door closed, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Everything they had feared, everything they had tried to prevent, was here in black and white. The innuendo, the implication, the suggestion that her success was not her own. She called Vincent. He didn't answer. She texted him. No response. She sat at her desk and stared at the phone and felt, for the first time since she had walked away from the Sentinel, the full weight of what she had done. An hour later, he called. "I've been on a call with the board," he said. His voice was very controlled, the voice of a man who had spent decades learning to contain crisis. "They want me to step back from editorial operations while an investigation is conducted." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm being sidelined. Temporarily, I hope. It means that whatever happens next, the narrative is going to be controlled by people who want me gone. Dente, it's going to be all right." He said it with a certainty that he didn't feel she could tell. He said it the way you say something you need to be true. "I'm going to handle this. I need you to stay calm. Don't talk to anyone. Don't respond to any questions. Let me manage the situation." "How long?" "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe. A few months." "And if they fire you?" A pause. The silence was very long. "Then I'll deal with that," he said. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion catastrophe. Vincent was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation. The board hired an outside firm to review editorial hiring practices at the Continental, which meant that Elena's personnel file was scrutinized by people who had never met her and didn't care about her bylines or her awards or the quality of her prose. They cared about the timeline. They cared about the sequence of events. They cared about whether Vincent Ashford had used his position to benefit a woman he was romantically involved with. The answer, of course, was complicated. He had hired her because she was brilliant, that was true. He had continued to advocate for her because he believed in her work, that was also true. And he had done these things while falling in love with her, which meant that the line between professional admiration and personal desire had become so blurred that even he couldn't say where one ended and the other began. Elena knew this. She understood it. But understanding and acceptance were different countries, separated by an ocean of consequence. Her mother called. She had seen the article. Somehow, she always managed to see the articles, and she had questions. Lots of questions. Why was Elena involved with a married man? Didn't she know better? What about the Marchetti name, the legacy, the sacrifices they had made? Elena listened to her mother's voice, then and reedy over the international line, and felt the weight of every choice she had ever made pressing down on her like a physical force. "I'm sorry, Mama," she said. "I know you're disappointed. I'm not disappointed. I'm scared. You're my daughter. I'm always scared for you. I'm a grown woman. I have a career, a life. You're my daughter," her mother said again. "You will always be my child. You will always be the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask me why the sky was blue. Nothing changes that. Nothing ever will." Elena cried for the first time in months. She sat on her bed in the apartment that still smelled faintly of Vincent's cologne, and she cried, and her mother listened without hanging up. The investigation concluded in March. The finding was that no formal policy had been violated. Dyson had recused himself from any hiring decisions involving Elena, and the editorial team had independently confirmed her qualifications. But the report noted that the appearance of impropriety was sufficient to warrant concern, and it recommended that the company clarify its policies regarding fraternal relationships between executives and junior staff. Vincent was reinstated, but with reduced responsibilities. He was no longer Chief Content Officer. That title was given to a woman named Margaret Chun, who had been poached from a competitor and who viewed Vincent with a particular wariness of a new regime taking stock of potential rivals. His new title was Senior Advisor for Strategic Initiatives, which everyone Her colleagues looked at her differently now, some with sympathy, some with judgment, some with the particular awkwardness of people who didn't know how to navigate a workplace romance that had become public property. She ate lunch alone more often than not. She stopped attending the office happy hours. She did her job, and she did it well, because doing it well was the only thing she had left. And through all of it, she and Vincent continued. They continued in secret, which was its own kind of torture. They couldn't be seen together, not at dinners, not at coffees, not even walking down the street. They met in her apartment, in his townhouse, in hotel rooms booked under false names. They spoke on the phone late at night, their voices barely above a whisper, constructing a private world that existed outside the gaze of the company, the press, the board, the world. "I feel like we're having an affair," Elena said one night. They were lying in her bed, and the city was humming beyond the window, and Vincent's hand was tracing slow patterns on her bare shoulder. "Like we're teenagers sneaking around. Except we're adults with careers and reputations and everything to lose." "Is that so different from what it was before?" "Yes. Before, we were secret because we were being careful. Now we're secret because we're being shamed." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel his breath on her skin, warm and even, and she tried to memorize the sensation, the specific weight of his arm across her waist, the particular rhythm of his breathing, the way the lamplight caught the silver in his hair. "I know this is hard," he said finally. "I know I've asked you to sacrifice more than I had any right to ask. But I want you to know, this is the most real thing that has ever happened to me. This is the first time in my life I've felt like I'm actually living instead of just performing the motions." "I know," Elena said. "I feel it too." "Then that's enough. For now. That's enough to get us through." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the sacrifices were worth it, that the struggle was temporary, that somewhere at the end of all of this was a life they could build together, open, honest, free of the shadows that had followed them since the beginning. But there was a voice in her head that wouldn't be silenced. A voice that asked, what if this is as good as it gets? What if the secret meetings and the whispered phone calls and the hotel rooms booked under false names are all you ever have? What if the universe, having noticed your happiness, has decided to teach you a lesson about wanting too much? She didn't answer the voice. She didn't know how. The end came on a Tuesday. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a shouting match, not with the kind of scene that would have provided a satisfying narrative arc. It came quietly, the way many things do, with a phone call, a flat voice, a sentence that rearranged the architecture of everything Elena thought she knew. "I can't do this anymore," Vincent said. They were on the phone. He was in his office. She could hear the distant hum of the building, the particular acoustic of corporate space, and she was in her apartment, standing by the window, watching the city flow past in its endless, indifferent current. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've spent 6 months living a double life, and I'm exhausted. I mean that Margaret Chun is circling like a shark, and the board is looking for any excuse to push me out completely, and I can't protect you if I'm fighting for my own survival. I mean that." He stopped. She could hear him breathing, ragged and uneven, the sound of a man at the edge of something. "I mean that I love you. I love you more than I have ever loved anything. And I can't keep asking you to suffer for that love. I'm not suffering. You are. I can hear it in your voice. I can see it in the way you've stopped smiling at work, the way you've pulled back from everyone, the way you flinch when someone mentions the article. You're disappearing, Elena. You're disappearing inside this thing we've built, and I can't watch it happen anymore. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe the only way to save what we are is to let it go. Not forever. Just for now. Until I can figure out how to be the man you deserve without destroying both of us in the process. The silence that followed was the longest of Elena's life. She stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker and felt, with perfect clarity, the exact moment when her life divided into before and after. If you walk away now, she said, I can't promise I'll be here when you come back. I know. I can't promise I'll wait. I can't promise I'll understand. I can't promise that I'll see this as anything other than you choosing your career over me. I know that too. Then why? Why are you doing this? Because I love you, he said again, and his voice broke on the word. Because I love you too much to watch you disappear. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. She hung up. She stood by the window for a long time, feeling the cold glass against her forehead, watching the city continue its relentless turn below. She thought about all the stories she had ever written, the investigation, the profile, the narratives of triumph and tragedy that she had constructed with such care. She thought about how she had always believed that stories had meaning, that they taught lesson, that they imposed order on the chaos of human experience. And then she thought about the story she was living, and she understood that some stories didn't have lessons. Some stories just happened. Some stories were just the record of a person walking into a room and making a choice and living with the consequences. She didn't cry. Not then. She would cry later, for hours, for days, for weeks, but not then. Then, she simply stood at the window and watched the city and felt the full, terrible weight of the moment. This was her destined catastrophe. She had known it from the first night, from the moment his eyes met hers across that conference table with an intent that was unmistakable, an interest that was undeniable. She had known it, and she had walked into it anyway, because she was Elena Marchetti, and Elena Marchetti had never been a woman who needed permission. She had been brilliant. She had been proud. She had been the center of attention everywhere she went. And now she was alone in an apartment in the West Village, watching the city lights, feeling the ghost of his hands on her skin, understanding with perfect, devastating clarity that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. Some catastrophes were not disasters. They were simply the truth, arriving late. She didn't call in sick the next day. She went to work. She sat at her desk and edited articles and answered emails and performed all the small rituals of professional life with a competence that surprised even her. Her colleagues looked at her with concern, with curiosity, with the particular wariness of people who sensed that something was wrong but didn't know how to ask. At noon, she went to the diner on 7th Avenue. She sat in the booth near the back, the booth that the owner had started giving them without being asked, and she ordered coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich that she didn't eat. She sat there for an hour, watching the other customers come and go, feeling the particular weight of solitude in a place that still held the ghost of his presence. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about calling Adrian Cross, who had gotten her into this mess in the first place. She thought about calling Diana Ashford, the woman whose marriage she had helped destroy, just to say that she was sorry, though sorry for what, exactly, she couldn't have said. She didn't call anyone. She just sat. And then, at 2 o'clock, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She answered. Elena. It was Vincent. His voice was very calm, the calm of a man who had made a decision and felt, for the first time in months, the strange lightness of certainty. I've been thinking about what I said, about everything. And I've made another decision. I'm resigning. Effective immediately. I'm walking away from GMH, from the career I've spent 30 years building, from everything. Because, he paused. She could hear him breathing, steady now, resolved. Because I realized that I was doing exactly what I told you not to do. I was being strategic. I was calculating costs and benefits. I was choosing the institution over the person. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep being that man. Elena closed her eyes. The diner seemed to tilt around her, the formica tables and the fluorescent lights and the smell of grease and coffee all blurring into a single, impressionistic smear. Vincent, I'm coming to get you. I'm in a car right now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. And then another pause. And then we're going to figure out the rest. Together. The way we should have done from the beginning. Before or after we destroyed each other? Both, he said. Before and after. That's what love is, isn't it? It's before and after. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. It's the catastrophe that makes you more yourself than you ever were before. Elena opened her eyes. The city was still there, flowing past the diner window in its endless, indifferent current. But something had shifted. Something had changed. The weight she had been carrying for months, the guilt, the doubt, the fear, had not disappeared, but it had transformed. It had become something else. Something she could carry. Get in the car, she said. Come get me. I'm already on my way. I know. I can feel it. She hung up. She left money on the table for a coffee and a sandwich she hadn't eaten. She walked out of the diner and stood on the sidewalk, and she waited. The city hummed around her. The autumn light was golden and oblique, painting long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere above, a plane was descending toward LaGuardia, its engines a distant, contented hum. Somewhere below, the subway was carrying thousands of people to their destinations, each one carrying a story they would never tell. Elena Marchetti stood on a street corner in New York City and felt, for the first time in her life, that she did not need to be brilliant. She did not need to be the lioness. She did not need to carry the weight of the Marchetti name or the expectations of her parents or the judgment of the world. She just needed to be a woman, standing on a street corner, waiting for the man she loved to come and get her. And that, she understood now, was enough. That was enough. 3 months later, Elena Marchetti published her first piece for The New Yorker. It was a profile of Vincent, or rather, of the media industry, using Vincent as a lens through which to examine the particular pressures and contradictions of power in the digital age. She wrote it with the dispassionate precision of a journalist who had lived the story she was telling, who had felt the weight of every choice and the consequence of every compromise. She wrote it, and when she was done, she understood that it was the best thing she had ever written. Because it was true. And because the truth, in the end, was the only thing that mattered. She still worked at the Continental. The investigation had cleared her name, and Margaret Chen, to everyone's surprise, had become one of her most vocal advocates. "You're the best writer in this building," Margaret told her at their first one-on-one meeting, which had the particular awkwardness of a new boss trying to build rapport with a subordinate whose personal life had become industry gossip. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone make you small. She took the advice. She let herself be brilliant. She let herself be afraid. She let herself be the woman she was becoming, neither the lioness nor the lamb, but something in between, something that could be both strong and vulnerable, both calculating and open, both the writer and the story she was living. And every night, when she went home to the apartment in the West Village that still smelled faintly of his cologne, she thought about the catastrophe she had walked into, the kiss that had destroyed her, the love that had rebuilt her, the man who had broken every rule she had ever made and then shown her that some rules were worth breaking. She thought about it, and she did not regret. She did not regret. The end. #epilogue. 1 year later, the cafe was in the West Village, 3 blocks from Elena's apartment, and it was the kind of place that didn't advertise. No sign, no website, just a door with a brass handle and a chalkboard menu that changed daily. Vincent had discovered it during his first week in New York, 30 years ago, when he was a junior analyst at a consulting firm that no longer existed, and the city was still a place where a young man with ambition could find a corner booth and pretend the world was his for the taking. He went there now on Sunday mornings, alone, and sat in that same corner booth with a cup of coffee and a Sunday Times, and he thought about the strange alchemy of time, how it transformed memory into something softer, something that could be held without cutting yourself. Elena found him there on a morning in October, exactly 1 year after the night she had quit her job at the Sentinel and walked into the rest of her life. She was wearing a gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans, and her hair was pulled back in the same strict elegance she had worn to her interview at Global Media Holdings, and she looked at him across the cafe with an expression he had learned to recognize, the look of a woman who was deciding something. "I got the promotion," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "The Continental. Senior editor. They announced it this morning." Vincent set down his newspaper. His smile was slow, spreading across his face like light through water, the same smile she had fallen in love with, the same smile that had destroyed her, the same smile that had brought her back to herself. "I knew you would," he said. "I told you. You're the best writer in that building. You told me a lot of things. I meant all of them." She was quiet for a moment. The cafe was warm, insulated from the autumn chill outside by walls that had absorbed decades of conversation and the particular silence of people who came here to think. A jazz trio was playing something she couldn't identify, Coltrane, maybe, or Monk, and the music drifted through the room like a second atmosphere. "I had a dream about you last night," she said. "Good dream or bad dream? I don't know. We were in the karaoke room again, the one at Maison Privy, and you were singing that song, the one we used to sing together. And I was watching you, and I felt." She stopped. She looked down at her hands, which were wrapped around the mug of coffee she had ordered without him noticing. "I felt like I was finally seeing you. Not the version of you that you show to the world, not the armor you wear in boardrooms, but the real you. The one underneath all of it." "And what did you see?" She looked up. Her eyes were very bright. "I saw a man who was afraid," she said. "A man who had spent his whole life pretending he wasn't afraid because he thought that's what strength looked like. A man who had built an empire because he didn't know how to build anything else. A man who," her voice caught, "a man who loved me the way I needed to be loved. Mathily. Imperfectly. With all the fear and the hunger and the hope that he couldn't put into words." Dante reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, and she could feel the calluses on his fingers, that detail she had noticed on the first night, that trace of the boy he had been before he became the man. "I'm still that man," he said. "I'm always going to be that man. I know. And you're still going to love me anyway?" Elena smiled. It was a small smile, almost private, the kind of smile that was meant only for him. "I'm going to love you because of it," she said. "Not despite it. Because of it." Outside, the city continued its relentless churn. The autumn light was golden and oblique, painting long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded, and somewhere else, a child laughed, and somewhere else still, a woman stood on a street corner waiting for a man who was already on his way. Inside the cafe, in the corner booth, Elena Marchetti and Vincent Ashford held hands over the Sunday Times and the cooling coffee and the remains of a life that had almost destroyed them both. They did not speak. They did not need to. They had said everything that mattered and everything that didn't, and the silence between them was not empty but full of everything they had survived, everything they had learned, everything they had yet to become. This was the catastrophe. This was the aftermath. This was the slow, patient work of building something real from the wreckage of something imagined. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Appendary ## epilogue. 1 year later, the cafe was in the West Village, 3 blocks from Elena's apartment, and it was the kind of place that didn't advertise. No sign, no website, just a door with a brass handle and a chalkboard menu that changed daily. Vincent had discovered it during his first week in New York, 30 years ago, when he was a junior analyst at a consulting firm that no longer existed, and the city was still a place where a young man with ambition could find a corner booth and pretend the world was his for the taking. He went there now on Sunday mornings, alone, and sat in that same corner booth with a cup of coffee and the Sunday Times, and he thought about the strange alchemy of time, how it transformed memory into something softer, something that could be held without cutting yourself. Elena found him there on a morning in October, exactly 1 year after the night she had quit her job at the Sentinel and walked into the rest of her life. She was wearing a gray cashmere sweater and dark jean, and her hair was pulled back in the same strict elegance she had worn to her interview at Global Media Holdings, and she looked at him across the cafe with an expression he had learned to recognize, the look of a woman who was deciding something. "I got the promotion," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "The Continental. Senior editor. They announced it this morning." Dyson set down his newspaper. His smile was slow, spreading across his face like light through water, the same smile she had fallen in love with, the same smile that had destroyed her, the same smile that had brought her back to herself. "I knew you would," he said. "I told you. You're the best writer in that building. You told me a lot of things. I meant all of them." She was quiet for a moment. The cafe was warm, insulated from the autumn chill outside by walls that had absorbed decades of conversation and the particular silence of people who came here to think. A jazz trio was playing something she couldn't identify, Coltrane, maybe, or Monk, and the music drifted through the room like a second atmosphere. "I had a dream about you last night," she said. "Good dream or bad dream? I don't know. We were in the karaoke room again. The one at Maison Privy. And you were singing that song, the one we used to sing together. And I was watching you, and I felt," she stopped. She looked down at her hands, which were wrapped around the mug of coffee she had ordered without him noticing. "I felt like I was finally seeing you. Not the version of you that you show to the world, not the armor you wear in boardrooms, but the real you. The one underneath all of it." "And what did you see?" She looked up. Her eyes were very bright. "I saw a man who was afraid," she said. "A man who had spent his whole life pretending he wasn't afraid because he thought that's what strength looked like. A man who had built an empire because he didn't know how to build anything else. A man who," her voice caught, "a man who loved me the way I needed to be loved. Messily. Imperfectly. With all the fear and the hunger and the hope that he couldn't put into words." Vincent reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, and she could feel the calluses on his fingers, that detail she had noticed on the first night, that trace of the boy he had been before he became the man. "I'm still that man," he said. "I'm always going to be that man. I know." And you're still going to love me anyway? Elena smiled. It was a small smile, almost private, the kind of smile that was meant only for him. I'm going to love you because of it, she said. Not despite it. Because of it. Outside, the city continued its relentless turn. The autumn light was golden and oblique, painting long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded, and somewhere else, a child laughed, and somewhere else still, a woman stood on a street corner waiting for a man who was already on his way. Inside the cafe, in the corner booth, Elena Marchetti and Vincent Ashford held hands over the Sunday Times and a cooling coffee and the remains of a life that had almost destroyed them both. They did not speak. They did not need to. They had said everything that mattered and everything that didn't, and the silence between them was not empty but full of everything they had survived, everything they had learned, everything they had yet to become. This was the catastrophe. This was the aftermath. This was the slow, patient work of building something real from the wreckage of something imagined. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.